Well, welcome back, my friend.
Hello.
I feel like it's been a long time since you've been on the podcast.
It has. I actually can't remember the last one that I did. The last one I remember doing was one with Max about heat stress. So I think that may have
heat stress. I don't even remember doing a heat stress.
I know, it's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
You were a staple, and then you started writing some courses for us, which we'll get to in a little bit. But we have Kyle Ruth back on, one of the smartest men that I know.
Which button is the applause?
Yes,
I think it's green. Try green.
Thank you.
Chris strikes again.
What was it?
Oh, you can't hear it. That's
No.
right. You don't have your headphones on. Yeah. He was like, sorry, Kyle Ruth.
Sick.
Over the last couple of weeks, we've had different coaches on talking about ways that we can prep for the Open and for quarterfinals. I think this time of year, everyone's kind of jumping on the bandwagon and thinking about what can I do to prepare. Now, big picture approach, you should be preparing all year round, especially now with the nature of how deep the sport is. But we want to give people some useful tools on things that you can do proactively now and then actively through the Open to make sure that you are your best self and that you're prepared to do whatever may come out. This week, we want to talk about how do you acquire new skills when they come out in the sport in a few days. So this is kind of a different topic, but I think it's something that people have panicked about as they've come out over the last couple of years. You think about 2017 when the dumbbell came out, and everyone's like, I haven't done a dumbbell snatch.
Yeah, what was that like? Walk through that real quick. Do y'all remember it?
I know that there was almost this immediate sense of panic across, and I would, I can really only speak to my own athletes, but I think it was just kind of this across the sport panic because people are like, dumbbells,
Right.
Wait, like I haven't done a dumbbell snatch in insert long period of time here.
I think we only use a barbell and a pull-up bar.
Yeah. This isn't the Open,
Right.
right? So I think for a lot of people, there was this sense of panic and they had no sense of how to quickly prepare themselves.
No, hold on. Let's slow it down. Even like the day of, Dave says,
dumbbell.
He announces it. What are y'all saying in the room just together?
I mean, the first thing that Brandon and I did, I remember going out and doing this because we were still doing the Open release. Brandon and I were like, all right, we have to go play around with the movement to kind of figure out what the best way to approach the movement is. That's one of the things with CrossFit is like, they release a movement and then 4 months or not even 4 months, 4 weeks later, the sport has arrived at like best practice
for sure
because it's a competitive sport. And when you crowdsource like a competitive movement, everyone's going to spend time figuring out the best way to do it. And then it just kind of like, it's like a meme. It just spreads right through the entire, CrossFit population. That was what Brandon and I wanted to do is we wanted to go out there and just experiment and play and figure out how to do a dumbbell snatch as effectively as possible.
Yeah.
And they had some really clear standards, right? So that's the other thing that's helpful is when you have clear standards.
Absolutely.
That will be a key, this year, especially with some of the new equipment, is making sure that HQ does get the standards right. But that's for a different discussion, but there were these confines, right? You had to switch the dumbbell below the shoulder, which means that like this drop technique that everyone likes to do from overhead, you couldn't use that. So we had to play around with that. You played around with stance. We figured out the wider you stand, the less range of motion you had to pass through. But then you're starting to light up your hamstrings and things like that. So like the first thing that we did is we went out and we played. We just literally went out and played with the movement for, 20 minutes, 35-pound dumbbell for us, and just figured out what would be the most efficient way to do the movement, and then tried to film that and spread it to the TTT community as quickly as possible.
I think one of the other things too is Kyle and I felt different things, and so we were relaying that as we went. Like, our height difference, the way that we hinge, what we use. I was pulling a little bit more aggressively in my arm. He was kind of using more of a hip pop, and we started to talk about, okay, for these types of athletes, what should they do? For these other types of athletes, what should they do? And then that's kind of how we came up with kind of some basic standards for the movement, and then that's when we sent it out to all our athletes. Yeah,
I think to that point, one of the things we're talking about is what is the fastest way to learn new skills. I think one of the fastest things that you can do, and this is aside of any like set skill acquisition, structure, is just get in a group and experiment, right? Because there is power in numbers. And during the Winners Coming Classic, we had burpees to a plate, and we were doing it on site. We had a bunch of people here, right? And it was like myself and David and some of those guys, and we started messing around with techniques for burpees to the plate, and we figured out that
you tried to do something ridiculous. Was it?
Yes, I came up with a bunch of different techniques that all met the standard that were laid out. We finally all kind of decided on this step to the plate, 2-step to the plate, step back into the burpee, almost step all the way back into the burpee as the fastest and most efficient way. But we wouldn't have been able to come up with that if it wasn't, 5 or 6 of us messing around with different techniques. And like, I would do something and David would be like, "Ooh, if you can do that, let me try this. And, like we just kind of built a technique in the 10 or 15 minutes that we were all prepping for the workout. That's in my own personal opinion, I think the fastest way to learn a skill is to get in a group of people who are also competitive.
Yes. There was no dumb ideas. I mean, there were, but
you refine it from there.
You were cool with trying dumb stuff because
two of my ideas were horrible, right?
But you have to try those because maybe it's not.
But the counter to that is people who are too cool to do something silly. If you're trying to figure out something new.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think is the most important thing, is having either people around you or just crowdsourcing an idea. So the benefit of having training partners is that because you have 4 or 5 or maybe 10 or 50, whoever is around you to practice those things, or the benefit of being on an online program like TTT Compete, or having a coach that can also relay, like we relay that information. We go out there and practice it. We get our on-site athletes to practice it, and then we send it to our athletes. So having a group that can hold you accountable to those movement standards, but also that you can learn from, I think is kind of step number 1 in acquiring a new skill.
Yeah, crowdsource. I think I've talked about it twice now, but I think there's something to be said to the power in numbers. And to Chris's point, I think it's really important to keep in mind that you need to be willing to challenge like the status quo, or challenge what everyone thinks is like the optimal way to move, because this sport, CrossFit, is not about necessarily doing things in the hardest way, right? Like if you think about bodybuilding, you want to make your bicep curl so that they fatigue the bicep as fast as possible. But if we had kipping bicep curls in CrossFit, you would want to come up with a way to move that's as efficient as possible and creates as little fatigue. So like they may release a movement that's a standard bodybuilding, double kettlebell shoulder to overhead, or, double kettlebell shoulder press, right? That's a bodybuilding movement, and you can perform it in a way to create isolation in the shoulders and triceps and create as much fatigue as possible. That would be a really bad technique for a CrossFitter. And so I think part of what we want to do is come up with ways to think outside of the box, but inside the confines of the sport. And a group is always going to be a really effective tool for doing that.
Yeah, we've talked about this many times, but we're trying to find the way to use the least amount of effort per rep. And so you have to try weird things like the butterfly pull-up. People were trying to figure out, how can I get my chin over the bar, and then how can I get my chest to the bar faster? And then all of a sudden, of course, people online are making fun of these guys like Chris Spieler that are doing butterfly pull-ups, but he could do 60, 70, then 100 in a row because he learned this pattern that was more efficient than just doing a strict pull-up.
Yeah, I would love to see what Chris's, I'm sure Chris had a great, strict number at that time, but I'm sure it was nowhere near what, it's just not even anywhere remotely close to that.
Yeah. Well, that's to that point. You think about, do you remember the video that he posted, and like no one could do 100 pull-ups?
It just surfaced online recently.
Did it?
Again. Yeah, I just saw it,
even now it's amazing to think that he was able to do that. I know he's a smaller guy, but that's like a perfect example of when people saw it, they're like, this is so silly. Like, why is he doing that? And then he goes out there and he's competitive at the games, even though he probably shouldn't have been, because he learned all of these ways that were just more efficient than everyone else.
I think I was around the sport and just getting involved in the sport at the time where the kipping handstand push-up kind of evolved.
Right.
And I remember watching a video of someone doing Diane and doing it strict, right? And I could barely do, 3 or 4 strict handstand push-ups. And then I watched a video of someone else doing Diane kipping, and A, it was way faster.
Yeah.
And B, I went from being able to do like 3 handstand push-ups in a row to like 15. So it was like an instant upgrade in my capacity. And that is, I think, a really good example of crowdsourcing. It's just there weren't as many people kind of congregated in one place, competitive people congregated in one place. So techniques didn't evolve as fast, 2011 as they do now.
For sure. So I think step number 1 for those that are listening would be to have a group around you that you can learn from, or just, I would kind of say like be a chameleon. Go online and find other people that have done that movement in the past that do it well, and then pick it. Pick it apart, see what you can do. With a dumbbell snatch, it wasn't a thing in CrossFit before 2017, or at least not a big part of the sport. But you could go online and see people doing dumbbell snatches and just learn the process of that movement. Or the same thing with a wall walk. That was around. So when that came out in 2020, people were freaking out. Or was it 2021? Whichever year it was. Yeah. When it came out, people were freaking out. How do I do this? Like, how many steps should it take up to the wall? How many steps should it take back down to the floor? But if you go online, you can kind of find some gymnasts, David Durante and others that had done wall walks in seminars that there were videos of. Look at that, review, and then come up with your best game plan based off of that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I would look at that as separate from like the sort of like crowdsourced experimentation. That's like phase one, movements release, crowdsource experimentation with your group or your online group, and go and figure out what's going to be optimal. Then another phase would be, finding the videos of people online, finding videos of people that are elite. A great example, if you want to watch the best wall walks in the world, find video of Alexis doing wall walks from the Open last year. I mean, they're absolutely shockingly faster and more efficient than everybody else even here. We have a great group of on-site athletes here, and she just it was embarrassingly different between hers versus mine.
And the style is also different.
Yes.
She jumps her feet up on the wall, which is hard for some people, but if you saw that and you could start practicing it before the Open, you could become as efficient as her.
I watched it and immediately thought that looks like a backwards burpee, right? So in a burpee, you hit the floor and you pop your chest up and get up as quick as possible. What she's doing, she's hitting the floor and popping her legs up in the same way as a burpee, except it's her legs instead of her upper body. And she gets her legs up to, to height essentially, in a fraction of a second, and then just quick hands into the wall, quick hands back to the line, and she's done. And I saw that and I was like, okay, I have to start practicing that, because it was literally a full step ahead. So I think that's really the second one, is to watch experts. There's your own self-experimentation, but then there's something about going and watching people that are just truly elite at the skill. Now, we may run into a situation in the Open where they release skills where there just aren't that many experts in the skill.
Right.
I mean, I would say kettlebell hang snatches would be the example, but we know that there's tests of people doing, 100 unbroken kettlebell hang snatches and things like that. So you'd be able to find video, but there definitely could be things like, during the age group semifinal last year, we had kettlebell farmers carries, right? And I think it was 200 feet, maybe it was 250 feet, but I had no context for figuring out how to efficiently move with two relatively big kettlebells. They've done, farmers handle carries at the games, they do that in strongman, but that's not a thing that people have done competitively. So it was hard to find, context video like that.
Yeah. And I think that takes us into, well, what can you do the day of, or the workout is released in the Open on a Thursday, you're going to do it on a Friday, you only have 24 hours, or maybe if it's late at night, you only have 12 hours. What can you do during that time? And that's kind of what I wanted to dive into, because that's where most people are going to be. Maybe you can search online and get some things, practice with your friends, have coaches that can help you. But what can you do now? It's Thursday night, I need to figure this out. So you kind of have a process. You currently are finishing up a new movement course that's going to come out in about a month or so, correct?
Yeah. So we've been working on what's called the coaching movement course, and skill acquisition is actually a big component of coaching movement, right? Let's say you bring on a new client. One of the things you're going to have to do is teach them the skills of whatever sport or, task that they're trying to attack. So we kind of came up with, a 4-step process for skill acquisition. And it works like this. So let's say we'll take a skill that's really common, like a bar muscle up.
Yeah.
All right. So the first step is what we call breakdown drills. So if you guys have ever seen any of the stuff that Mia, the TTT coach, has put together, these are all perfect examples of breakdown drills, where she has someone jump to the bar and jump into an L position, then drop off the bar. And then they do that a bunch of times through repetition. And then they go up and they jump to the bar in an L and move into an arch. And they do that over and over and over, repetition. And then just progress their way back to doing a full bar muscle up. And she's been able to teach, at this point, probably hundreds of people how to do their first bar muscle up just by going through these breakdown drill steps, where you take the whole movement and break it down into its component key points. And she basically identified those as the L position, the arch position, the hollow, on the swing back, and then what it's like to turn over the actual bar muscle up. She did those breakdown drills and then created, videos and things like that for people to break it down. So that's the first thing. So
essentially, we are segmenting the movement into priority pieces. This piece, before you can do a full bar muscle up well, you need to jump to what Mia says, jump to a pike or jump to an L position to get into the perfect position to then go into your arch. And then once you go to your arch, so on and so forth. You have to have that process to do it well. Some people can just jump up and do things, right? Some people are just naturally gifted. But for those that are new to a movement, or those that maybe they complicate things in space, you need to break it down into one step at a time.
And even people that learn skills naturally well can benefit from doing breakdown drills.
Correct.
I think you're probably similar to this, but the first time I watched someone do a muscle up, I was like, oh, I'm going to do that. And I did a muscle up. But my muscle up technique for that first muscle up, and probably my first 100 muscle ups, was probably pretty bad relative to where it is now. And had I had a better coaching process at that time, had I had someone to walk me through, all right, when you're doing a bar muscle up, you don't jump into a pike, you jump directly up to the rings and then initiate your, like, just little step-by-step things. The skill acquisition process would have been much faster.
For sure.
I try and think about how would this apply. Okay, a new skill is released on Thursday. How would this apply? One of the simplest things to do, let's just take the dumbbell snatch from 2017, right? So you take the video of the demo, right? Someone's going to be releasing demos, right? So you take that video of the demo and you just pause and find the key positions, right? So what does the person look like when the dumbbell's touching the floor? Replicate that position. What does the person look like when the dumbbell's at the hip? Replicate that position. What does the person look like when the dumbbell's overhead? Replicate that position. What does the person look like when the dumbbell's switching hands? Replicate that position. Those are your like 4 key points in the dumbbell snatch, and then do breakdown drills, right? Find the bottom position, find the hip position, find the overhead, and find the transition. That would be a breakdown. And that's
also a time that you can explore new positions. Maybe the person that you watch in the demo, they look good, but it doesn't feel great for you. You can start playing around with, to your point on the burpee to the plate, with different positions. Maybe the step up does work, or maybe it's a 2-foot hop, and then you can segment it that way and then start identifying the pieces that you need to fix in your own movement standard or your own movement that you're doing to make sure that it's clean and effortless as you go through the workout.
That's a good point too, because a lot of times the demos are done by people that are those really rapid motor learners and, you know, high level athletes. Like you might watch, Rich Froning do like his burpees with a 2-foot hop back to the bar. Well, for most of us, that's probably not the most efficient, and it's not going to be sustainable for like a 27, 21, 18, 59 structure. So that's I think another key point to keep in mind is like, yes, the key positions for what an elite athlete looks like are important, and that's a good starting point for doing breakdown drills to take a movement and kind of figure out what its key positions are. But also keep in mind that isn't necessarily going to be what's optimal for you, your anatomy, your body type, your engine, all of those things.
Yeah. The last thing that I'll mention when you're doing these segment drills or breakdown drills, sorry, I keep calling them segment because that's the way that I structure this in my head, is time those movements as well, based on the time that you want to get in a workout. So this is getting a little bit more performance-based, but I think this is important. If it is a dumbbell snatch, you watch a demo, they average, let's just say 2.1 seconds per rep. I know that I can't hold 2.1 seconds per rep, but I want to hold 2.3 or 4. Then when you're doing those drills, you need to find the segments, the breakdowns that allow you to get that same time every single rep so that you're as close to the goal time that you want in the actual workout.
Yeah, I think that's to the point of breakdown drills. You know, I think one of the reasons Mia's drill progressions work so well is that most people have the same bottlenecks. They don't jump to that pike or L position effectively. They don't hit an effective arch position. And I think to your point with the dumbbell snatches, if you can identify what your limiting step, the quote unquote rate limiting step in the movement is, then that's the fastest way to improve it. And then you just hammer that drill.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever position it is, just hammer it and it should improve.
Cool. So you have that first, the breakdown drills. What's step number 2?
Yeah. Step number 2 in my mind are exaggeration drills. So this would be someone, you took them through the breakdown drill steps of bar muscle up. Now they're able to do 2 or 3 bar muscle ups. But there's parts of the movement that are not as efficient, and we want to exaggerate particular parts. So a good example would be, well, now they're jumping up into a pike, but their pike could be bigger, but we still want to be doing the full movement. So they're going to have them jump up and do a full bar muscle up, but I'm going to tell them, all right, I want you, when you jump up, I want you to exaggerate the L position or exaggerate the pike position as much as possible on these, right? So that would be a good example. Another one would be like when you transition over the bar. A great example would be using your legs to swing out of the dip and just say, hey, I want you to exaggerate swinging your legs out of the dip a little bit more aggressively. So exaggeration drills are things that take a component of a movement and just, emphasize that. You see this a lot in Olympic weightlifting with like long pull snatches or muscle snatches or things like that, that exaggerate a particular component of the movement to make a change in the person's actual snatch or actual clean and jerk.
Yeah, I actually was going to mention that because I think most people that have done the sport of CrossFit have done those exaggeration drills. They don't think of it maybe as that. They think of like, I'm just doing a muscle snatch to work on maybe my turnover, or I'm doing snatch pulls to make sure that I can get it into the hip correctly, or I'm a little bit more aggressive in that second pull. But those are exaggeration drills just within an Olympic lift as opposed to maybe a bar muscle up or a dumbbell snatch.
The same thing can be said for cyclical movements as well. A lot of these drill styles came from swimming, right? So I have a swimming background, and like exaggeration drills would be things like catch-up stroke. You know, a lot of people try and swim with a catch-up stroke where their hands are meeting out front every stroke. Well, it's not a really efficient way. Well, it might be a very efficient way to swim, but it's not a very fast way to swim. But it's an exaggeration drill. It exaggerates that catch in the front. The same can be said for rowing, right? So like exaggerate the speed back into the rower, or create a pause in different positions in the row. Those are really good examples of exaggeration drills that have really good carryover to making techniques more efficient or faster or more powerful.
Yeah. And by the way, when we exaggerate those drills, it feels like you're exaggerating it, but oftentimes on film, it's almost kind of like right where you need to be. You know, you think you're doing a huge pike or a huge L position when you jump into it for the bar muscle up, but in reality, you're not. Feel and real are different. And so it's always good to feel like you're over exaggerating when you're trying to develop a new skill. And then you can taper that back as you kind of learn it.
Well, I think to your point, the next step that we talk about, you said feel and real are not always the same thing. I think one of the most important things, and this isn't the next step in our series of drill progressions, but video analysis is a huge component, especially.
Absolutely.
Let's say it's Thursday, new movement, our dumbbell snatch is released, and you've gone through some breakdown drills and you've watched other people, you got together and came up with a technique that you think is efficient. Now it's time to film it. Number one, you got to make sure that you meet the standards that HQ released. I mean, how many times have we seen a movement released? People are, the wall walks are a great example.
Oh yeah.
Where they're like, all right, I think in 2020, I did the entire workout and then went back and watched my video, and I was like, my hand was not back
when your feet were coming down.
My feet were coming off the wall.
I would say half of the people that did the workout did that
on site, had to do it again because of that, right? So it's like, once you've gone through this process of skill acquisition and skill refinement and making it as efficient as possible, you need to film yourself to make sure that you're actually meeting A, standards, and B, that it is a movement that, you know, is replicatable in an actual competitive setting.
Yeah, I agree. And it allows you to then compare yourself to other people as well. So like, I love the idea of pulling side by sides of an elite level athlete, or maybe one of your peers that you can find online. I do this often with old open workouts that maybe someone's retesting. Pull a Rich Froning, a Matt Frazier, maybe one of your peers that's like, okay, let's say someone finished 500th, someone around that 500th, and then you can compare all of those. Where is someone picking up time? Where is someone losing time? Where am I gaining and losing time? What are they doing different on the box step over that I'm not doing? What are they doing different on the burpees that I'm not doing? And then that's another way that you can learn from all of these movements that come out so that you can be faster in the open.
So there's one thing with video comparison that I think is really important, and that is to try and find someone with similar anthropometrics or similar biomechanics to you, right? So I've coached a handful of athletes that have been, you know, semifinal level athletes or regional level athletes that are taller, that are 6'3". And when you're comparing what Matt Frazier does,
yeah,
right, who is 5'6", maybe 5'7", right, to someone who is 6'3", or, you know, pushing 6'4", but on their CrossFit forms they'll fill out 6'3" because they don't want to be that tall. It's definitely not, the technique is never going to look the same. And so I think finding people who have similar limb length proportions and things like that for your comparison videos is really important. For those taller athletes, I tell them, I was like, go find Fikowski, go find Matt DeLugos or something like that. One of the other guys that is competitive in the sport at the level you want to compete at, who also has the same limb lengths and proportions that you do, or vice versa. You know, if you are looking at Fikowski's muscle ups and you're 5'6", that's probably totally not a good comparison. So I think that's also really important to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what's the next step? You exaggerate. So we go from breakdowns to exaggeration to what's next?
All right. So now we've got, like you said, breakdown, exaggeration. Now we're in the full movement, and we're no longer trying to exaggerate single components. Now we use what we call mindful cues, right? So it would just be simple, like one-word reminders to make sure that you're emphasizing a particular portion. So on a muscle up, it might be like punch to the top, right? So now you've gone through the process.
That's 3 words.
Single phrase. Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, that was 4 words.
Hey, leave us alone. Leave us alone.
How about punch?
Punch.
There we go.
Punch. But yeah, so simple phrases. Thank you, Chris, for your correction. Simple phrases that allow people to, carry over what they learned in the exaggeration drills into the full movement. Yeah. And again, the goal is just trying to search for efficiency or power or whatever it is that you're looking for as a coach or as an athlete to get out of this now. Those are the simple things that we're looking for. So for myself, I think about things like punch on a jerk, right? Because if I don't emphasize the punch out, then sometimes I'll miss the bar forward or have a soft lockout, things like that. I know for myself on snatches, it's like move your feet. If I don't move my feet, I'm going to miss the bar forward. So it's simple little things, mindful cues. I've gone through the breakdown drills, learning how to snatch. I've gone through the exaggeration drills, the muscle snatches, the long pulls, the slow pulls, all that type of stuff. And now I'm just trying to refine the snatch period. And, then I think it comes down to just having one cue when you're approaching the bar or when you're doing, ring muscle ups. I have to remind myself to be patient, right? So I've got to be patient with the turnover. A lot of times when I get tired, I want to rush the turnover, do it early, and I don't end up missing, but the dip is a lot harder, right? Yeah. So if you're just a little more patient, let your legs rise higher. It's coming up with simple, mindful cues like that. And that's actually, I think, when you are going through a quick skill acquisition process. It's released on Thursday. Now you're trying to learn it. You'll boil down at the end of your, learning session on Thursday or Friday before you do the workout on Saturday. You'll boil everything down to like one important piece. So it's like in a dumbbell snatch, it might be, transition at the face, right? Where you're trying to do that transition when the dumbbell's right in front of your face or something like that. But you'll have one simple thing to remind yourself, because let's face it, when you're in the middle of a workout and you're dead tired, you can't think of 10 different, movement cues. And if you are, then you're slowing yourself down, right? As soon as you move the focus internally, we actually talk about this a little bit in the course, the internal versus external cues. You want to use, for performance-based stuff, external cues, right? So focus on something external, not like use my shoulder. It's like punch the dumbbell. Right. So focusing on external cues, but keep them real simple and go through that whole movement learning process first, then come up with what your cues are going to be. Yeah. You'll learn your cues based on the learning process. Exactly. Especially when it's something you have to learn in 12 hours or 24 hours. And the one thing I'll just kind of, I think, reiterate is those are really helpful if it's just like one really cool, important thing that you can keep in your head. Like if it is punch for your jerk. Because if you're in the middle of battle and you're finishing the 15-minute AMRAP and you have to build to a 1RM jerk, you're not thinking about anything else. But if you can just keep telling yourself, Kyle punch, Kyle punch, Kyle punch, then you're going to do it, and you're less likely to miss in that scenario. The average person probably has 10,000 thoughts going through their head in the 30 seconds that they're approaching the bar. They're thinking about the miss. They're thinking about whether they hit. They haven't gone through the process of just like isolating their focus on the one thing that will make the difference for them. And I think part of that takes experience, right? Part of that takes practice and gaining experience. But in the end, I think if you can keep yourself focused on one thing, I would also say visualization might fall in there. But, when you're walking up to the bar, visualize yourself punching it out, and then just give yourself that reminder as soon as it's in front rack, punch. That right there narrows the focus so much and takes away so much of the ambiguity that exists when people are approaching a bar or getting ready for a heavy 1RM. Yeah. Okay. So let's make this more actionable. Let's take the dumbbell snatch and kind of walk through. I know we've kind of done that as we've walked through these steps, but the first step, dumbbell snatch, comes out in 2017. We already talked. You and I went out to the floor and we started that learning process by segmenting or breaking down the different portions of the dumbbell snatch. What would you tell the athlete to start thinking about right away? Right away, I would say for the dumbbell snatch, I'd say, all right, number one, think about your foot width. The wider your feet are, the less range of motion you're gonna cover. So play around with foot width. Number two, make sure that you're contacting both heads of the dumbbell, because when we went out to play, right, it was so much easier, and it was very easy to skirt the standard having only one dumbbell head touching the ground. So I would say, hey, make sure that both are touching and film yourself doing it, because sometimes it's hard to know when that's happening. And then, focus on where the dumbbell transitions. So for me, the cue was when the dumbbell passes the face, transition. Right. So I think those three things would be like the breakdown. Really play with those and start with a light weight. So if your RX is 50 pounds, then start with a 35-pound dumbbell. If your RX is 35 pounds, start with a 20-pound dumbbell. That way you can get some volume in without fatiguing yourself for the next day. Yeah. Because the reality is, even when you're doing it, if you and I were playing around with a 35, my hamstrings were sore the next day from just constant repeated hinging. So I think, now, that soreness probably isn't necessarily a bad thing. Might be able to create some tension. That is a whole different discussion. But just keep in mind that you can fatigue yourself out too. Yeah, for sure. I do think start with a lighter load, and then it is play. The first part of that is breaking it down into just kind of playful movements, finding the most efficient movement off the ground,
kind of mid-hip, turning over, how are you going to switch your hands, all those things that Kyle just mentioned. And you could do this with a partner, like, hey, you do a couple reps, I do a couple reps, and talk, like we already mentioned. Or like one of the ways I like to learn things is kind of set a clock and make it I'm going to do a 10-minute EMOM, where every other minute I'm trying a new, like, whatever format of how I'm going to do this dumbbell snatch. And then at the end of that 10 minutes, I kind of write down some notes or think about it in my head of which part of that felt the best. And then I start refining it from there.
The advantage to that as well, and you've already touched on this a little bit, is that you can get your time for each set. So if you're doing, say, 6 reps and you know that each set of 6 is taking you 18 seconds and you make a minor change and now it's taking you 17 seconds, well, you know that change ended up in improved speed. Or if you make a change and it still takes you 18 seconds, but each set was a little bit easier, then you found something that's a little bit more efficient, right? And we're in a performance-based sport and we want one of two things. We either want to improve efficiency or speed. Those are the two things that will allow you to improve your performance in the sport. And so doing it in that format on an EMOM is going to be really effective. The other advantage to doing it in an EMOM format is you can get some video, and when you're done, you can go back and review each of those and make sure they met the movement standards. I mean, I think if you're given a super tight time frame, that really is the process, right? You're going to, number one, need to play with it. Number two, you're going to need to take it and mess with the performance aspects. I think an EMOM is a great format for that. And number three, you're going to have to make sure it meets standard.
Yeah.
And if you've done that, you know, you've pretty much done all the pieces that you can. The only other thing, like I said earlier, that I might add to that would be some visualization afterward. If you're really serious about your performance, visualization is a powerful tool for movement learning.
What about the pros and cons of maybe not going right away? Like going Thursday night or Friday, save it to way later, like getting more time to play.
Yeah, I think that there's a huge benefit to that. The problem for most, let's say, bubble athletes to get into quarterfinals is they likely need to test every workout twice. Now, as the field gets deeper and deeper, it's going to be harder and harder to get into quarterfinals. I know that some people that listen, they're like, oh, no, I'm a semifinal athlete. Well, we're not talking to you. But for the person that is on the bubble, 10%, 11%, 12%, they need to test on Friday and learn from that. That's where you can visualize again. You can review your video. You can kind of play with it on Saturday and Sunday and then retest on Monday.
The only problem with that is there might be some workouts that come out, like the deadlift burpee ladder.
Yeah.
That wasn't repeatable for 99% of the people who did the open.
Oh, you're definitely right. And that's the challenge of it. But I also think that we may see a different style this year that's not as aggressive. That would be my bet.
I hope you're right. But if you're not right, then I think the strategy for people, rather than testing the workout twice, what they do is they should do like almost like a dress rehearsal on Friday, right? So Thursday night or maybe Friday morning is like playing with the movements, figuring out the combinations, especially if it's a new skill. Then like Friday night or Saturday is their kind of like dry run where they do half the reps. Instead of doing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up in 10 and back down, they might do like 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and that's it. But they get a really good sense of pacing for the workout, how it's going to feel, and all those things. And that's almost like a skill acquisition thing in itself. I have, in fact, we included that in our competitors manual years ago. The kind of dry run or test run, I think, is a really effective tool, especially when the workout isn't repeatable. If it can be repeated and you're not going to suffer any consequences from that, just repeat the workout.
Yeah.
99% of the time, people do better.
Yeah. I think most workouts will be able to be repeatable, but that's a great point. Last year's work, the deadlifts, I think, just ruined people. And especially at that, they were so dense, people were going so fast, and it was just a lot of volume. So that can happen.
You just got to hope the new skill's not on a workout like that.
That is true. The one thing I want to mention, on that first day, Kyle talked about widening your feet on a dumbbell snatch. And this works for almost every single move, not the widening of your feet, but the thinking about your range of motion. How can I minimize my range of motion on any movement in the sport? Because it is about being as efficient as possible or just your time. So if you can reduce your total time doing a dumbbell snatch or a squat or a wall ball or you name the movement, that's going to benefit your overall time and hopefully your feel in the workout.
Range of motion reductions improve both aspects. Right? They improve the efficiency because you're moving your center of mass or the load or whatever a shorter distance. And because you're moving at a shorter distance, you're moving it faster. And so if there are ways to just move each foot out 2 inches on each side and you still have the range of motion to get the dumbbell there and it's not putting your hamstrings at risk or anything like that, you should do it. And it's inside the standards of the sport, of course.
Obviously, you have to keep the standards in mind. I mean, that's just the sport that we play. But I think that is one of the first things that I think about when I am playing. Like when we played with that, when we played with the wall walk, how can I just reduce my steps? And that may be challenging for some people that just aren't strong enough in the shoulder, or they can't rotate their thoracic spine to get their arms back. But that was the first thing that I was thinking is, can I get my arms back in 3 steps? Or do I have to do 4 or 5 steps like the people that were demoing it? You know what I mean? And so those are the things that you need to start thinking about when you're acquiring new skills, so that you can also, it's not just learning the skill, but it's also thinking about your performance.
Yeah, I think we are in a performance sport. And so in the end, you know, I laid out some skill acquisition steps, but those skill acquisition steps are not necessarily performance optimization steps. Those are for learning skills rapidly, or, you know, someone who's struggling to get their first ring muscle up or bar muscle up, or whatever it might be. That's steps for learning that. I think there's a whole different set of skills that are required if you are trying to optimize your performance. And a lot of that comes down to just simple things like watching the clock, thinking about range of motion, trying to come up with ways to optimize either efficiency or speed of the movement. And if you're going to optimize speed, you can't do so at the expense of efficiency. So you can't just try harder to go faster. And if you're going to optimize efficiency, you can't do so at the expense of speed. Right.
I think that's probably the most important one. It's really hard to balance those two things, because when you're learning a new skill, if you're just doing it by itself, I know we keep using the dumbbell snatch, but I think that's a good example. If you're just doing dumbbell snatches, they may feel really easy. You combo that with burpee box jump overs, and now they feel really hard. You have to think about, what will this feel like when I am comboing it with a different movement or a plethora of movements in a chipper?
Isn't that
we got plethora in there?
Isn't that the crux of CrossFit? Now we got plethora and crux. Isn't that the crux of CrossFit? Is that it's not the movements in their isolation; it's the combination of the movements that really is the kicker. Yeah, it's like the hamstring. They do that on purpose, right? The hamstring fatigue from that dumbbell or from the deadlift, and the bar facing burpee from last year's Open, like that was intentional. Yeah, you know, and most people wouldn't think about that, because deadlift and burpee isn't the most commonly combined combination. Wow. We got alliterations in here too.
I love alliterations. Do you ever watch the Throwdown? I always do this.
Speaking of the Throwdown, Max, when we said we were going to film this episode just now, said that if he had one point to throw into this topic, it would be that learning a new skill is a skill of itself, and that you should be practicing that year round.
Yeah, I think that's probably the final point. And this is important for any sport, not just a sport where there's always new things coming out. You need to try new things. You need to put your body into new and weird, uncomfortable positions, not dangerous positions, but just different for you, so that you can always explore those ranges. But also, I think that if you can learn new things all year around, it's easier to learn when you have to under pressure.
I think there's something to be said for expanding your movement vocabulary. Yes. I think, you know, if you look at children who play lots of different sports and you know, engage in lots of different styles of movement, they go on to be better athletes as, you know, young adults and adults than people who were single sport, with exceptions. Obviously, there's specialization sports and things like that. But that's almost true, you know, across the board. And if you think about CrossFit, like the basic foundations of CrossFit, one of them is learn and play new sports on a regular basis, which I think I might not be the best at doing. You know, I like to find my groove and ride in that. But I think there's probably some benefit of stepping outside your comfort zone and just going out and learning new skills. Maybe I should come out to the golf course with you.
Yes, you should.
Although I did play golf a lot when I was younger, so it wouldn't be necessarily...
I'm going to hold you to that. You said it. You said it in front of everyone.
That sounds expensive. I got a cheaper option for you. Let's go get the spike ball net.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even something as simple as that, just moving in different directions, rotating, things that you don't do in the sport of CrossFit, I think are beneficial, and maybe for health and longevity too. Not just like, oh, I'm going to try this new skill to learn new skills, but like doing other patterns, getting in different planes can be beneficial for you long term.
You know, I read this book years and years ago, I think when I was in high school, about skill acquisition, and the big principles this guy had were all like, they all kind of tied back into motor learning. A lot of them are what I just kind of laid out, right? Breakdown skills and things like that. But he had all these really unique drills with tennis balls that would just be like, they were games. And a big part of what he laid out in that book was that like play, which we talked about as part of skill acquisition, is one of the most effective way to learn skills, right? So playing games like spike ball, playing golf, right? Playing with your kids, all of those kinds of things are some of the most effective skill acquisition tools that we have. Now, it's different in CrossFit, trying to turn things into a game, but we've done that with handstand walk horse, right? Where we'll get a group of 3 or 4 people, and it's like, I go and I do a handstand walk around the cone and back, and then everyone tries to match it. And if they can't, they get an H, just like, horse with basketball. But those types of things are really effective skill development tools because it takes the pressure off. Chris had mentioned, no one's going to be making fun of you for trying out really ridiculous burpee styles on those burpee to a plate. He mentioned that earlier. And I think there's something to be said that when you're playing, it takes the pressure away from quote unquote failure, because there isn't necessarily failure in that sense. So I think that, maybe that's the last piece here is during the off season, play is part of the equation if you want to be a successful, skill acquirer long term.
I absolutely love that. And, Kyle and I used to work out a lot together. Man, this is probably 7 or 8 years ago, but we did a lot of that. And we learned new skills much faster than probably otherwise because we were doing that. We were like just trying different styles of box jumps, different ways to sprint on the bike. As silly as that sounds, like, should we ramp up? Should we take 2 slow pedals and kick? And all of those little things allowed me to be a better coach too, because we learned stuff together. And that all goes back to the beginning of like having a good group around you that you can crowdsource and learn from.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Now here's a real question. What do you think is going to come out?
Oh gosh. All right. So I've thought through this quite a bit, obviously, as a coach. Are we talking open or quarterfinals?
Start with the open.
Start with the open. Okay. I think first off, knowing that like the double kettlebells and things are in the open, I think we might see double kettlebell deadlift as like the new movement, which isn't, it's not like that novel of a movement, but if you haven't done double kettlebell deadlift, man, it really hits the hamstrings and low back a lot different than a regular deadlift.
Did they confirm that you needed 2?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yes. It's 2 kettlebells and 2 dumbbells.
That doesn't mean that they'll use 2. It just, you need to.
Yeah. And I have a hard time thinking that they're going to do things like double kettlebell hang clean and jerks with 70s, right? I've played around with that. And I'm not saying I'm the strongest athlete in the sport, but I'm definitely one of the stronger athletes in the sport. And that's a tough movement. Yeah. It's like, that's not going to happen for
Could you see them doing an isometric hold as like a 15 or 23.1A?
My only problem with that is it doesn't test work capacity, right? So if CrossFit is work capacity across broad time and modal domain, then it doesn't test work capacity. It just tests isometric hold, which is not a measurement. They could
do a farmer's carry, which is a hold, but moving at the same time.
Moving at the same time, so therefore it's testing work capacity, right? Your ability to move a load over a distance. That's like, that's me being nitpicky with CrossFit's own kind of rules, but I think I would find that to be less likely than a double kettlebell deadlift or something.
Didn't they do a handstand hold one time in the quarterfinal?
That was the
games.
The COVID year. They did a max handstand hold. I could say they could do that maybe in quarterfinals. That's an easy one. You put a 4-foot by 4-foot box and make people hold it.
All right. So sorry.
So open, I think double kettlebell deadlift. And I think there's a possibility, since we have the bench, I think we might see double dumbbell bench with the 50s and 35s. I think those would be the unique things that we might see in the open. I've had a lot of my own clients tell me that they think there's going to be a return to like an open that isn't just for the quote unquote body weight ninjas, is what they describe it. Now, I'm not sure that the opens of the last 2 years have necessarily been geared towards the bodyweight ninjas, but there have been a lot of really simple bodyweight movements with the wall walks, box jump overs, bar facing burpees, and a gymnastics, all the pulling gymnastics in the last one. So there's been a lot of that. That's what I've heard. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I think those 2 double dumbbell and double kettlebell movements, because they're unique,
for sure,
I think may make an appearance.
Yeah, I agree with you on the deadlift. I think that's probably the most, to me, that would be the second most likely. I think the most likely will just be a farmer's carry. I think that's simple. Yeah. They did that last year. It's a good way to introduce people to kettlebells. And if you did that into chest
when
to
did
bars,
they do it last year?
It was in the age group semifinals.
Age group.
It's brutal, right? It was surprisingly challenging. I remember, so I tested half the workout. I did 4 rounds of that 8-round workout. And when I got done with 4 rounds, I was like, this isn't going to be that bad. I'm going to sail through this thing. Feel pretty good. Dude, round 5, literally the round after the one I tested was like, oh my God.
There's always that threshold that once you spill over it, it's just so much harder.
Wish I would have tested 5 rounds because I would have known.
Okay. Now I need to pace.
Yeah.
Those would be the guesses. I agree with you. I don't think we'll see snatch or clean and jerk, but I can tell you this, that for those that are in our online programs, you're going to be doing those every single week, because that would be a huge separator. Now we'll start with lighter kettlebells and just skill work, but you'll definitely see farmer's carries every single week. You're going to see deadlifts, and you're going to see some other variations with the kettlebell, like an overhead walking lunge, a single arm overhead walking lunge, single arm overhead squat, all the things that could come out that would be massive separators.
double kettlebell front squats and front rack walking lunges are extremely challenging.
Correct.
Especially if they, not especially, depending upon the standard that they implement. I mean, if you can hold them on your shoulders, they're pretty easy. If you have to rack them out front, then they're really challenging. Now, that's a much more challenging standard for them to uphold, especially for an open where, you know.
Yeah, it's hard to see on video, but that you are right. If you put them in front of you, it's so much harder than a dumbbell.
Yeah, it basically, it goes from easier than a barbell front rack version to way harder than a barbell front rack version when you have to rack them out front.
Yeah.
So quarterfinals.
Hold on.
Yeah.
On the open, I'm calling single unders.
Single unders?
Yeah, just because I feel like after the games thing that happened, it's a movement that everybody can do, right? Hypothetically.
Yep.
And they're going to want to make a big, giant point like, hey, everyone could do this, but did you practice? We had it at the games, and we saw people.
We had a throwdown probably a month or so ago.
210 single unders.
Yeah, and that was really interesting. My calves were blown up from the single unders and then recovered during the crossover singles and recovered even more during the double unders. And I'm not sure what the reason for that is, except that it might just be the frequency.
Yeah, the cadence is a little bit faster
of the single unders. But that's definitely something, if you think that single unders are going to show up, then spending some time building your calf resiliency for single unders would probably
and practicing
be really
going fast on them.
This
I'm
is
sure
another
everyone
thing.
can do them, but can you go fast on them?
We have singles, speed steps, and crossover variations every single week in our online programs because of that reason. I think
I've been stealing it.
Yeah, here's the other thing too. Like, we made it super simple. Like, they're EMOMs or just like basic intervals. But even if they don't come out, learning those skills can help you to the point of just like practicing things all year round for double unders or other variations that may come out.
Getting really good at the crossover single unders for Masters Fitness Collective a couple of months ago has made my double unders the best they've ever been.
Yeah. I mean, you learn better positions. It's good for your wrist position, where your elbows need to be, how you need to jump, all of the basic cadence of a double under and single under, learning how to vary that. I think all those things are important.
Yeah, and you end up having to use one of the beaded ropes, which creates a little extra resistance. So it's like kind of like training with a weighted rope, but at the same time, not necessarily.
What's the least likely scenario in the open before we go to quarterfinals?
Come on. 12.1. I want to repeat. Let's go.
No, like a movement that could come out with the kettlebells or.
Oh, I think a lot of people.
I mean, that's one movement.
I think a lot of people are saying we're going to see
you're right.
They want to see heavy stuff, and I still don't think we're going to see a return to like. You remember the snatch ladder? I think it was chest to bar or toes to bar, double unders and snatch, and it went up to 265. They've had the one that was chest to bar or toes to bar. I can't remember that. And clean, I think squat cleans that went up to like 335 or something. I don't think we're going to see a return to those things.
Yeah, I don't either. And it's funny that you had some people tell you that they think that it's been body weight, which I guess that there is there's always been a bias in the open, and probably it should be. It needs to be a lower barrier to entry, and then as you go to quarterfinals and semifinals, it can be more challenging. But from what we've seen of Bosman and what we have found from programs that he's written in the past, he is a body weight, strict gymnastics, strict pull-ups, those kind of things.
That's what I said.
That. Yeah. I mean, that's all I could find. It was very few heavy workouts. It actually very much reminds me of Pat Sherwood's programming with linchpin. It's just like the true old school CrossFit. And while it's not bad, you're not getting exposure to the 265-pound snatch under fatigue as much as maybe most people are programming now in the sport.
I think if they do it right, it's going to be like you said, it's going to be a progression across. So you'll see the open and the quarterfinals will start to get a lot heavier. And then you better see that stuff at semifinals, or you're probably not going to get the right subset of athletes at the games to be able to handle the loads they've tested at the games.
That's correct.
But semifinals, you mentioned strict pull-ups. I told you this already. We've talked about this. I think we're going to see strict pull-ups in a Metcon in quarterfinals. I'm probably wrong. I'm always wrong.
Oh, that's the Hiller videos I want to see. Those motherfuckers trying to kip at the end.
How would you judge it? I don't disagree, because that's something that has been programmed, and that would make a hard workout.
It's hard.
But how do you, what's the standard? Like, what do you put out that can keep people from kipping at the end? Like,
because do you want my real answer to that?
Yes.
They don't care. Think about it. If you look at the movement CrossFit, if you look at the movement selection for the last 12 years, when have they ever picked a movement because it would be easy to judge? We've had handstand push-ups in the open. How is a handstand push-up any easier to judge than a chin over bar pull-up? It's not. And so I think the argument that like that's impossible to judge.
No, to me, I think it's not impossible. I think it's easy to judge.
Never
Did you
once.
ching over the bar without you kipping?
Right? Never once.
But people are going to kip is my
So
point.
here's the thing, though. Like when I get tired, I get to about right here, where
Yeah.
the bars with my nose, and
Reach
it's
the
that-
chin.
It's that little like jerk.
Yeah.
Is that a
you can't
kip?
do that. Yep.
Well, it would depend upon your leg movement. I think they could easily define
Legs in front of
kipping.
the bar.
Yeah, they could say legs in front of the bar. Or
I
they
would
could-
suck at
Or
that
they could
workout.
just say there can't be excessive leg movement. And dude, when have they not had a standard that said like bouncing the deadlift off the floor? Can't be excessive bouncing on the deadlift.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but the idea that HQ isn't going to program a movement that makes for a challenging workout just because the standard is challenging to uphold or to judge, I find that to be a weak argument because their precedents.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Here's mine that it won't come out, but I would love to see a kettlebell Turkish get up.
Oh,
It would
good.
just be awesome
so
to see.
hard.
I know people don't realize, and that's something that they used to program all the time on
All the
CrossFit.com.
time.
How awesome would that be?
Adam programs them for me all the time at the end of
Yeah.
workouts.
I'll do them as a warm up, but
It'll be
rarely in a
like
workout.
10 per arm, and I'll get to like 6, and I'm like, I'm done.
These are so challenging.
These are so hard. I'm done.
Just kettlebells in general really faded there, didn't they?
Yeah.
They did.
So maybe this will bring them back.
I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
I like it. I mean, basically what Bosman's doing is looking back at all the old school Greg Glassman stuff, what he wrote in journals, and it's like, hey, we haven't done parallel bars in a long time, or whatever else they program at the games, and now we're going to bring kettlebells back.
Do you think we'll see something as simple as a kettlebell swing?
That wouldn't surprise me, but again, that's a really hard one. Like, where's the line? Where does the kettlebell have to be pointing directly up? Because you know how challenging it is to gauge if it's slightly tilted forward or too far back, or is it just above your eyes? Like, there are just so many challenging pieces to that puzzle.
There are some epic judging struggles that have happened with kettlebell swings.
It happened at or was it
as a-
sectionals
as a
at the time?
Sectional
Or-
then, yeah. Yeah, that one. I heard about that a lot when I first started.
Yeah. Quarterfinals, what's your guess, Chris?
I don't know if I have a quarterfinal one.
Do you think we're going to see like a 3-part strength test again, since we've seen, the CrossFit Total, and then for age group quarters, it was the CrossFit Total 1, and then, for quarterfinals, it was CrossFit Total 2?
I think
we'll see something like
it's
that?
going to be completely different.
I liked that format because it's not just one lift, right? I think spreading across, if you're going to do a 1RM test and have that be an entire score, then I think you need to have multiple tests, within that.
I agree.
Yo, what was me and Adam, I think it was me and Adam one day did like a heavy, like a med ball to the wall ball target. Could you see something like that? Like a throw to a target? Like
Well,
no squat. It was just a arms only throw.
They don't have a heavy ball listed, so you
11
won't see
foot.
that. Yeah.
That was nasty in the
I don't
age
know.
group semi.
Did they say a height?
No.
They just said a wall.
They just said a wall.
Yeah. I mean, it could be 11.
The 11 foot, if you haven't trained 11 feet, or you're not currently training to 11 feet or training with a 30-pound ball to 10 feet, I would recommend that you do that, because
it's a great
that was
idea.
so much harder than 20 pounds to 10 feet.
It doesn't seem like it because you're like, oh, it's just another foot. And the 20-pound ball I'm comfortable with. But to your point, if you do more than 10, 15 reps, you realize the fatigue point is much higher.
Yeah, 210 reps. I'll tell you all about how much harder that
yeah.
was.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, Kyle, thank you for coming on, my friend.
Of course.
See you next time.
See you next time.
We just started our open prep cycle in TTT Compete. To see 6 of the featured workouts from this training cycle with demos from our on-site athletes and get a free month for a friend if you sign up before January 7th, visit trainingthinktank.com/compete.